So where were we? Light and shade on form. We had previously looked at this painting by Klimt, which obviously has very little to do with light and shade. It is focused on shape rather than form, graphic design, color, and texture. Nothing wrong with that, but the concept of light and shade on form is not something to be ignored, and especially in a basic drawing class. And Klimt was classically and traditionally trained and would have understood these effects very well. He knew his stuff, and he knew how to make or take an exception. Let's keep looking at some other exceptions to the application of light and shade on form. We can learn so much about the concept of light and shade on form by looking at manifestations of its opposite. Here's a close-up of the female face on the Klimt painting. It's quite, quote-unquote, realistic, but think of where the lighting is coming from. The fleshy, apparently realistic treatment of the face is in stark contrast to the almost medieval graphic, gilt-illuminated arrangements surrounding it. The face is nothing like the faces we've been looking at in classical painting or cinematographic shots. There is no play of light and shade. The face is lit from all directions. If you were to turn the image into black and white, desaturate it, the values, that is the values of grey between white and black, that we see are only the result of the color mixes, not from the varying of light or shadow. In a way, the lighting is fairly close to the fluorescent, diffuse, and general lighting that we saw in the previous clip of the plaster cast of the human back. The light in these paintings also provides a flattening effect, which in this case accentuates any local color in the face, the flushed cheeks, for example. Here are some earlier Lucian Freud paintings. The sitters look pale and wan. Again, notice how flattened out they are as a result of the very general diffuse lighting. Look now at some of Freud's later pasty oil paintings. Many of them are lit in a similar fashion, as if from all around, but now, instead of completely flattening out the face like Klimt and Freud's own earlier work, Freud is exaggerating the color and creating faces that are chiseled planes, not from the result of light and shade, but from shifts in the color and tone of the complexion of the sitter, from plane to plane. And the colors generally seem to be fairly sickly, exaggerating the unusual mother-of-pearl-like colors that fair-skinned people seem to exude in the middle of winter when they can look so pale and wan. Freud's subjects often seem to look like death warmed over, and why not? In painting the flesh, one cannot help but have thoughts about its inherent mortality. As thick and substantial, and as the color shifts from plane to plane there is none of the sense of light and shade that we have seen in more classical and cinematographic treatments of the face. But even in film, or at least in video, there are exceptions. Here is a shot of Barry Lyndon from Kubrick's film of the same name. And more interesting, here are some shots from sitcoms. Situation comedies used to be shot live, and often on low budgets. The efforts to set up dramatic lighting on a film set are expensive. Every shot would probably have to be set up independent of other shots in terms of lighting. Sitcoms get around this by having a fixed and general lighting scheme that covers every angle so that there are no shadows to be concerned with. Art directors can keep the background either lighter or darker than the actors' flesh tones and attire, and the characters should, in general, read against the background. In animation, characters were usually painted in midtones, that is, middle values. So to have them read against the background, painters and art directors like myself would, in some series, style the backgrounds to be high key or lighter than the characters, and some were styled to have the backgrounds darker than the characters. Either way, the characters would read against the background. If background values veered into the middle values, the characters risked getting lost. But in sitcoms, the approach of a standard lighting scheme to solve problems of complexity had a secondary effect. It apparently added levity. Let's face it, shadows are deeply perplexing, and shadowless, flat flesh tones are kind of uplifting. Even if a sitcom had the budget for dramatic lighting, they would generally continue to embrace the levity of a flat surrounding light. So we've been looking at light raking across form at a low angle, much like the spray paint did in the other little episode. We also looked at a dreadful, amorphous, poorly lit plaster cast of the back that I pointed out was lit with quote-unquote relief lighting, relief. We should take a moment to consider modeling form with value in terms of relief. Relief lighting assumes that the light, in a sense, comes from the viewer's eye. In the diffusely lit plaster cast photo, the light is close to this. If you look closely, as planes turn away from your point of view, they get slightly darker. Here's a drawing of the back with light raking over it and revealing form. And here it is drawn in relief or with relief modeling. Can you see how the surfaces facing the drawer's point of view are lighter and planes become darker as they turn away? One of my life drawing instructors I was fond of at art college was also a martial artist, and the studio felt like a dojo, which he would circumvent shouting, "Relief! Relief! Relief!" when we were drawing. By the way, I have to mention that the studios at the art college, the Ontario College of Art, were modernist, 50s or 60s, but nevertheless classic designs in terms of lighting, with huge skylights facing north, with the sunward side of those skylights shaded against the intruding direct light. So the studios were lit beautifully for drawing and painting, and for the use of models. This ultrasound of a fetus is essentially in relief. The planes turn away from the point of view of the sound, or light if you will, and get darker, so much so that the line quality actually emerges, that a line quality actually emerges at the edge or outline of the form. Just look at the arm on the fetus. It looks like a drawing by Michelangelo, who often lit his figures and forms in relief. Can you see the resemblance? This is one of the nice qualities of relief modeling. The planes turn away from high relief to get darker and form clear, varied lines on the outline of the form. It can be a lovely approach for drawing. Here is a drawing by the great anatomist Barksey, who is essentially drawing in relief. In a lot of digital programs, the default lighting seems to be relief. Bas reliefs, that is, relief sculpture has a long history, starting from very rudimentary designs and moving to modeling of greater complexity. Relief sculptures can be modeled digitally. Relief sculpture is distinct from modeling in the round. I'm not sure if the term relief modeling comes from relief sculpture, but you can certainly see the similarities. I'd better do some further mopping up or clearing up of a concept I've tossed out. Value. The idea of value. Values are pigmentless tones between black and white, that is, black, white, and all shades of grey. I love grey. I see the world, see form as grey. As artists used to say, value trumps colour. When I look at a colour wheel, it's not the primaries I'm interested in. They basically come out of a tube. It's the vast number of greyed down and nuanced versions of colours between pure white and the lightest of tints. To black and the darkest of shades and everything else in between, especially everything in between. This isn't a painting course, but in order to explain the notion of value, as we will apply it in drawing, I feel I must cover some of the fundamentals that I usually reserve for painting courses. Light and shade have value, as we have seen when light is played on colourless plaster casts. Many shades of grey are produced by casting light on casts. But colour also has value. This is why color is such a distraction from envisioning what is in light and what is in shade, and the failure to discriminate between the effects of light and shade on form and local color, that is, the color of the object, is what separates good painters from bad painters, in my opinion. Here is something I produced, the tedious things I have to produce for demonstration material. I've lined up colors trying to guess their value from light to dark. I'm not perfect at this by any means, but a trained painter should be able to fairly closely judge the value of one color with complicating factors of tint and shade against another. You have to be able to see in black and white. As a painter, you don't want dark values off in the distance, deep in the picture plane, usually because they will tend to come forward. You have to recognize discreetly the values provided by light and shade and the values provided by local color in order to manipulate these two separate sources of value. When I was in animation, we would often Xerox our background paintings in black and white to see if we had misjudged our value structure in any way. Or we might use an illustrator's smoked glass monocle to look at our painting. The monocle made everything a little bit darker, but desaturated what we were seeing so we could judge one value against another. Confused? I cannot tell you how difficult it was for me personally, and I presume many other artists in training at my art college, to segue into describing form by painting from drawing. The major confusing factor was color. Dozens of us pushed paint around quite meaninglessly, just hoping something random would pop up to recognize the merits of and preserve. We lacked a structural vision for our painting. I generally still see this quagmire of muckiness among art students. I solved the problem in my final year spent in Florence, Italy, when I discovered how Renaissance artists created a grisaille, looks like grisaille, underpainting in tempera with no local color. The underpainting was like a painting of a plaster cast and would only describe light and shade on form. Renaissance artists would then glaze, that is, apply very transparent tints of oil color, the local color of the objects, on top of the underpainting. The two discrete effects would come together to produce the highly tactile and evocative painting the Renaissance became known for. I replicated the process in watercolor and found that it also worked superbly for this approach. When I started in animation, I did the same thing with gouache initially, and would carefully sort out my lighting and its value structures, and then tint the gouache on top. And the gouache, tint the local color of the gouache on top, eventually matching values with opaque color to create a painting with more substance and body. These series of photographs I've produced should illustrate how the various aspects of grisaille and painting with glazes works. You can see some pieces of fruit in the full color representation here. This is essentially what you see with your eyes. If you are discriminating, you can see the effects of light and shade, as well as the local color of the individual fruits. You might even notice light bouncing to re-illuminate some of the shadowed surfaces. But you really have to look for that secondary lighting. Turning the color photo into black and white is instructive, but it's not overly helpful in separating light and shade from local color. The color of the fruit has now been turned into value, which is co-joined with the value of the effects of light and shade. Not so with this photo, in which the all local color has been removed. It is as though the fruit are made of plaster. This photo is very much like a grisaille painting. This is really interesting. This is in fact what we need to imagine when what we are seeing if we want to consider the effects of light and shade on form. Here is how the fruit Here is the fruit now lit as though in a situation comedy, or as a Klimt or a Freud face. That is, as though the light is coming from all directions. There is no shade. We only see local color. There is nothing to distinguish one fruit from another, or one part of one fruit from another, except local color. This is also interesting. If we desaturate what we were just looking at, we now see local color, local value rather than local color. So we're shifting from local color to local value. The fruit colors have all been translated into their value, their color value between black and white. And this is interesting to see as well. What Renaissance artists and what you and I can do in our painting, if we do an underpainting, here is the underpainting, is to glaze a local color on top of the underpainting. The two discrete effects merge to create an image of something which contains both domains and is a convincing likeness of reality. I found these two images online of a digitally produced sculpture or image. Here's the one. It is as though it is a plaster cast. Watch how it changes as a local color is applied to the grisaille. Digital artists often render things devoid of local color first and then adhere color and texture to it. I found in some teaching I've done that virtual digital artists have less trouble understanding the concept of light and shade distinct from local color than actual physical painters. This little explain a movie is starting to sound like a painting course, which it is certainly not meant to be. But I felt compelled to try and describe some of these concepts in order for us to have a grasp on what it means to be talking about values and light and shade on form, creating values distinct from the distracting effects of local color.